All right. So these one are from the Bamford book. AS Macro by Bamford. It's a decent book. I think you will see it on the drive also. If you want to use it, please go ahead. It's one of the updated ones. So it's not a bad book uh, to work with. ठीक है. So yeah, let me bring this question on the side. So this is not a past paper, but it's one of those exam style questions in the recent book. Explain the main influences on the components of aggregate demand and consider which component is likely to change the most from one year to another, which one's going to change most often. But first part of the question, make sure that you're spending good enough time to answer that. Explain the main influences on the components of aggregate demand. Main influences on the components, all right? So few things about this. First thing, good idea to start by defining aggregate demands. That's the first thing I would like you to do. It's the total value of goods and services produced in a country in a given period of time. And then you might want to suggest the formula, which is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. And then very briefly suggesting that C को कौन affect करता है? C को you have the household expenditure, right? I के लिए you have the business investment. You're not going to do it like this. You're going to do it in paragraphs. And then G is the government expenditure. You can mention on what things are we talking about, right? This is exports. This is foreigners' demand for local goods. And then you subtract imports because these are international goods. So you minus the import expenditure from this whole thing. And you get yourself the IGX minus M. Okay, G, moving on. Explain the main influences on the components, right? What are those factors which is going to cause these components to change? This is what I can get from this question, that यही बात हो सकती है, because the phrasing is such. It's not that explain the components that can influence aggregate demand. It is the main influences on. It's a very open-ended question, honestly. CIGX minus M को कौन सी चीजें affect करती हैं? How many influences? I would say at least go for two influences at least. So from the influences, you could do, I think, direct taxes. Yeah, taxation. I think that would have a decent amount of effect. And I would say something like that if direct taxes rises, then the purchasing disposable income is going to fall down. Disposable income falls. फिर क्या होगा उसकी वजह से? The result would be consumption is going to go down, investments are going to go down, and eventually the entire aggregate demand is going to go down. I think that's a decent amount of decent influence. उसके अलावा, I think we can even talk about interest rate, right? Again, if the interest rate goes up, the cost of borrowing is gonna go up, and that would result in borrowing to fall, right? And what is that gonna do? It's gonna cause the C to go down, I to go down, and eventually, aggregate demand is likely to go down. Okay, Ji. That would be the first part of this question. दो influences तो बताने चाहिए, because main influences plural के अंदर है question के अंदर, so I would assume कि at least दो तो बनाने चाहिए. फिर उसके बाद this would probably be 6 marks for you, 2 marks for this, होना चाहिए 2 marks for this, you know, and then 2 marks for AD or उसकी knowledge and understanding. Um, Consider which component is likely to change the most from one year to another. Now, this is a debatable thing. It really depends on, well, I would, if I had to answer this part, I would be something like, or consumption, I think, would rarely change in size because what people need to spend on, they would continue to likely to do. In my opinion, the things that would change the most would be maybe government spending, it might change, or exports. I think net exports के अंदर बड़ी major changes आ सकती है. But again, the question is really, yeah, it depends on the economic certainty in your country. It depends on the government's uh, policy for the year. For example, right now, if you compare to Pakistan, our export import is one of the most vulnerable thing because the way our dollar value is changing. तो उसकी वजह से you would see a very significant difference in the export and import. If we let it devalue significantly, then our exports number is going to change the most. Because remember, it says it's not saying which component is the largest. It's saying which component is likely to change the most from one year to another. So it's very circumstantial, right? So what I'm going to evaluate in this one is that it depends on the country's uh, economic, political conditions.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah, speak up.
So in consumption, if we're talking about things just beyond necessity, so isn't consumption also likely to change then?
It might, yeah, it might. हो सकता है because again वो भी बात आ जाती है. Again, it's an open ended, it's up to you. Developing के हिसाब से बहुत बड़ा फर्क आ सकता है. I would say developing की consumption mostly, if you take it on a macro level, there's a high percentage that goes towards developing, so you don't have much of a consumption on the side. So it might not be influenced as such because the rich will still continue to buy those things because they don't have any issues, and the poor can't really cut down on the necessities. So it really depends. It's a very open-ended. There is no wrong answer to it as long as you argue it correctly, I would say. Okay. In consider वाले questions के अंदर honestly बहुत ही rare case होगा in which you would have a very straight on कि ठीक है जी ये evaluation, it's a one-sided one. It's very open. You can talk about whatever you want, any component. It depends, honestly, on the country, right? So I'm just simply mentioning that it depends on the country's economic and political conditions. For example, if uh, there is a massive devaluation, right? If there's a massive devaluation, then exports rise can be more bigger and import fall can be quite significant. So X minus M ki jo value hai overall might be quite significant in going up. You understand that? Or you could even say that if there's political unrest, you know, if you have unrest in the economy, like for example, definitely this year, this is going to happen. If you look at the investment numbers this year from the business side, you will see a very significant fall. So if you have like a political and economic unrest in the country, business investment uncertainty causes business investment to fall quite a lot. So business investment is going to fall as a result of that. एनी component, एक component के बारे में बात करनी है, you give your a reasonable argument for it, तुम्हारा है 2 mark. It's an easy mark to get. It's just that you should be able to pick up on how to go about your discussion on that. All right. Any question for this one? So I'll move on to the next one then. All right, let's take a look at part B of this question, right? क्या ये question बन सकता है? अभी तक तो I haven't seen a question like this, but these are some of the exam style questions. You might as well discuss it. Discuss whether an increase in consumer expenditure will increase a country's output, a country's GDP, in a sense, we're saying. We have to discuss whether increase in consumer expenditure will increase the consumer with the country's output. I think what I would want to do is aggregate demand is basically aggregate expenditure, right? And when I say country's output, technically, this was one of the methods of our calculation of GDP. GDP is gross domestic product, which is the output produced in the country, which can be measured through aggregate expenditure, which is basically adding up CIGX minus M. So according to this equation, I'll agree, but I'll do my analysis, but I will agree that if consumption goes up, this entire equation is sort of suggesting that, yeah, aggregate demand will go up and aggregate expenditure, which is the same thing as aggregate demand, and that might lead to increase in country's output. अब सवाल ये बनता है, what they should have also placed the number is whether an increase in consumption expenditure will always increase a country's output. That could be one of part of the question. That could be a trigger question, trigger word over there. कुछ command word तो दे दिया उन्होंने कि discuss करो. ठीक है, so I would want to suggest कि ठीक है जी, I will talk about किस तरह से consumption in durable goods like furniture and computers and non-durable goods like bread and wheat and all of that. If people's spending go up on these things, so obviously the producer would be interested in producing their stuff, and overall the demand for goods and services is going to rise. सही ये agreement वाली part हो जाती है. But under what circumstances will it not increase country's output? ठीक है. तो इसके अंदर I would actually love to bring in my because whenever they talk about output में increase आया कि नहीं आया, whenever they move towards uh, macroeconomic objectives, but country's output का increase is a macroeconomic concept. So I would love to talk about my situation over here, about in fact, this actually what I'm drawing right now will take us towards the short run, long run argument, and that would be your evaluation in this case. So, अगर मैं सिर्फ short run के point of view से बात करूं, this is what I'm doing. Let me just make the a little curvy one. Right, this is how our short run aggregate supply looks like. और ये price है, aggregate demand है, which is CIGX minus M. Real output hai, and this is the output that is being produced, right? This is real output. When it says country ka output increase ho raha hai, it doesn't mean nominal terms ke andar. For some of you, it might be confusing, but actually I've taught this a little later. जब हम economic growth का part पढ़ेंगे, that is when I have introduced the nominal and the real. So मैंने पिछले part के अंदर उसको cover नहीं किया है. I was waiting कि मैं थोड़ा सा और detail में जब जाएंगे economic growth और other macroeconomic objectives, तो वहाँ वो discussion मैं करूँगा. But real output के अंदर increase आ रहा है, तो real output का increase basically suggests country's output. So if T goes up and AD increases, right? So what we would see is that, yeah, country's real output is increasing, more output is produced. However, there is a problem here. Imagine up now, this is my analysis for दूसरा part. If T is going up, but let's suppose I and G and X is going down, and it sort of like counters the C, because remember, C is the largest number, right? So say 5% increase would be quite significant as compared to IGX के 5% drop there. But the point is, if consumption is going up, but other sectors are not buying so much stuff, AD might not increase. Or the better argument would be कि ठीक है consumption की increase होने से अगर economy perfectly elastic side of LRAS है, so in the long run, it's quite possible that output will increase. However, if we are at potential side, then output, अगर हम full employment के ऊपर है, right? We call this full employment. So if we are at full employment, then maybe country's output just cannot increase. How can you increase it then? Well, how we can increase it is somehow if we are able to shift this LRAS curve to the right, that means if we're able to increase the potential, consumer good is not going to help. Consumer expenditure is not going to shift LRAS to the right. Business investment and government spending in infrastructure can do that because remember, those are supply side policies. तो ये short run के अंदर तो नहीं हो सकती ये चीज. Right? So short run के अंदर तो it's just going to be an inflationary, it's going to create an inflationary impact. So this could be your, discussion because all you have to do is कि क्या consumer expenditure, क्या C के बढ़ने से country का output increase हमेशा होगा कि नहीं होगा, that is what we want to talk about. ठीक है, इसके अंदर evaluation क्या है? Evaluation is about this. It depends on short run versus long run. In the short run, it might, if we are at unemployment, you can actually introduce PPC curve over here also and consumer capital goods के साथ भी तुम उस diagram को बना सकते हो. But I would say macro के अंदर ADAS पे ज़्यादा rely करो and the discussion on ADAS. Any questions on this? All right, so far we haven't really dealt with any question that might come about the circular flow of income that we did, right? 8 mark का question बनता है. With the help of a diagram, explain the circular flow of income and consider whether all countries have similar leakages and injections. ठीक है? So what I want to do in this one is, I want to explain the concept of circular flow of income and other knowledge and understanding. I think I might have to explain leakages and uh, injections, right? Withdrawals and injections, as I've taught you. Question काफी extensive सा है because the thing is this. It's a diagram जो भी बनेगा. Circular flow of income talks about how the income that people earn. Okay, I might not have done this, but chalo, now that we are discussing this, this is what happens. What do people do with their income? Okay, if I earn $100 in a fourth sector economy, what will I do with it? So I say, if I earn an income or ये Y income को represent करता है, this is what I'm going to do with it. I'm going to consume some, okay? On let's say domestic goods, मैं imports को हटा देता हूँ. I will consume on domestic goods. I'll buy all these chips, biscuits, and petrol and all. What else do I do with my income? I put some in my savings. Okay. What else do? I have to give government some money, taxation, and then I buy some imported stuff. So ये वहां पे चला गया. This is my distribution of the income that I earn. So अब मैं इसको एक मोटा मोटा हिसाब ले सकते हैं कि every time I earn $100, what do I do with it? Well, I consume on 60 on this stuff, and about 10 the government takes it, and 20 about imported goods में चले जाते हैं, और somewhere around leftover is how much is leftover? 10 जो है मेरे savings में चले जाते हैं. This is what I do with my income. Okay. The goods and services which are produced, who purchases them? So I say consumers, जो domestic में consume कर जाते हैं. और कौन कंज्यूम करता है पाकिस्तानी गुड्स? और बिजनेसेस खरीद लेती हैं, और कुछ गवर्नमेंट खरीद लेती हैं, और कुछ फॉरेनर्स खरीद लेते हैं. ऑलराइट. So technically what's going on is, if you notice, you'll see something. What is that? STM. These are my withdrawals from the system. These are, in this case, leakages. And what are these values? These are my injections into the circular flow of income. So technically, what happens is, according to circular flow of income, there were two ways through which we found the equilibrium. This was one way. You can go into the previous lecture, class number 2 ke andar, we said one of the ways through which you can find equilibrium is if income is equals to aggregate expenditure. That's one of the ways through which you can find your equilibrium. In fact, मैं ऊपर से ही values उठा लेता हूँ. Let me do these ना. Income की क्या है? Income is domestic consumption plus savings plus taxes plus import. Okay. And what are the expenditures? Domestic consumption plus injections plus government spending plus exports. If I had numbers for them, these two would cancel out because they both mean the same thing. So technically, STM, which is my leakage, is equals to the injection. And that was our second equilibrium ka tarika, where the withdrawals should equals to the injection. Mathematically, I'm proving it, but I've ended up going more into the lecture of it. For this particular question, you do have to talk about them, but this is the diagram they're looking for. Okay. The diagram, I am assuming this is the diagram. This is the only diagram we have. जिसके अंदर we take household on this axis and we take firms on this axis, और circular flow के अंदर हम क्या कहते हैं कि household factors of production provide करते हैं firm को, और firm इन factors के बदले में rewards pay करते हैं. ठीक है. Secondly, firms goods and services देते हैं, और ये उसके बदले में पेमेंट्स करते हैं. ठीक हो गया. और फिर इस सर्कुलर फ्लो के अंदर कुछ लीकेजेस हैं. ये एमसीक्यूज में पूरा ये डायग्राम आ सकता है बाय द वे. और लीकेजेस के अंदर यू हैव, व्हाट डू यू हैव द सेविंग्स, you have in a two sector taxes, you have imports. मैं बार बार फोर्थ सेक्टर की बात कर रहा हूँ. आई थिंक इस क्वेश्चन में वो भी मेंशन करना जरूरी है. अगेन इट्स, ये A2 के अंदर सवाल दिया होता तो मैं it would have been more like a 12 marker or a 20 marker. तो फिर मैं काफी सारी उसमें बात कर सकता हूँ. investment, but I'm sure the most amount of stuff that you put in is going to get counted. Spending and finally export. So this is your circular flow of income, which you will have to explain exactly what is going on in this. You will first talk about how in a two-sector economy, the firms and the household provides factors of production, land, labor, capital, enterprise to the firm, who then manufacture goods and services and gives it to the household. Household makes payments for these goods and services, and the firms basically give the reward for the land, labor, capital to the household, and this is how the circular flow works. However, in a circular flow, savings takes the money out of the system, and then, as we call it, a leakage, and then the same money is injected back into this system through investments, which is an injection. उसी तरह से टैक्सेशन निकलता है, गवर्नमेंट स्पेंडिंग से इंजेक्ट हो जाता है, जो इंपोर्ट से पैसा बाहर जाता है वो वापस से इंजेक्ट हो जाता है. The main question over here is consider whether all countries have similar leakages and injections. Okay. So now consider there is no wrong answer as we discussed earlier. क्या सारी countries के same होंगे? I would say no. I would say देखो countries which have high tax rates, really high tax rates, उसका ज़्यादा जो है amongst the leakages, they might have more money going out in taxes and maybe more money coming in through spending. Countries which are highly dependent on imported goods, they might have more imports, or the countries which are more open to trade will have more injections and leakages based on export and import. Countries, usually developing countries के अंदर savings के numbers कम होते हैं because generally people use their entire income for goods and services, whatever is left after taxation and imported goods. So they are left with very less savings, but developed economies के अंदर people have reasonable income, so they're able to save more money. So ये एक अच्छा question बन सकता है इसके ऊपर, in which again the consideration is whether all countries have similar leakages and injections, and that's just ridiculous. Even percentages don't remain the same. All right, the percentages, it's a very country to country concept, and that's how it's gonna sort of work. ठीक हो गया. So that is ADAS और जो अभी तक हमने किया है उसकी थोड़ा सा relative. उसके बाद let me see if I can find a few more questions on this. This is from Terry Cook की नई वाली book. उसके अंदर, if I look at the first question, I think that is quite relevant to our case. Nominal real मैंने नहीं कराया तो इसलिए I won't deal with that as of right now. But yeah, let's try this one out for a moment. क्या कहते हैं? All right, take a look at this. इसमें क्या है? Explain with the help of diagrams. दो diagrams चाहिए कम से कम. Explain and compare a movement along and a shift in aggregate demand curve. थोड़ा सा स्टैंडर्ड रखते हैं पहले पार्ट के अंदर क्या करना है. पहले पार्ट में वही मेरा स्टैंडर्ड है जो अभी मैंने पिछले उसमें कराया. 1A के अंदर I will say let's define aggregate demand and give the formula, right? And फिर उसके बाद make a habit of this. Briefly define each component. All right. They haven't asked you कि किस तरह से component increase decrease होगा. That's irrelevant. I would like you to define each component C, I, G, X minus M. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, what is C, what is I, what is G, what is X minus M with the example. Okay, what do they include, right? Consumption could be on consumer goods and services like biscuits and teas, the cars, and business investment can be in machines. Government spending can be on merit, public goods, so on. ठीक हो गया. But then they say aggregate demand curve also. So I would like you to tell me what is aggregate demand curve. That's a different thing. I've mentioned this before also. Aggregate demand एक अलग चीज है, aggregate demand curve एक अलग चीज है. Aggregate demand curve जो है वो relationship दिखाता है between price and real output, right? It shows the relationship. It actually shows an inverse relationship. एक डायग्राम तो मेरा इसका बनना ही चाहिए जिसमें मैं एडी कर्व दिखाऊं. ठीक है. इनफैक्ट व्हाट आई विल डू इज मैं पहले वाले को यूज कर लेता हूं टू एक्सप्लेन द मूवमेंट वाली साइड. तो नाउ इधर मूवमेंट वाली क्या साइड मतलब compare a movement along the curve with a shift. अब graphically तो that's a very easy thing to do. बट मूवमेंट के रीजन और शिफ्ट के रीजन में फर्क है. बहुत बड़ा फर्क है. और ये फर्क हमने हमेशा इस चैप्टर को पढ़ते हुए वी मेड श्योर कि ये फर्क को हम वाजे तौर पे वी मेक इट क्लियर. व्हाट इज द डिफरेंस? वेल, नंबर वन, ग्राफिकली तो फर्क ये है कि एडी का कर्व अगर इंक्रीज होता है तो इट शिफ्ट टू द राइट. ओके जी. ये मूवमेंट और शिफ्ट के अंदर ये फर्क है. बट व्हाट आर द कॉजेस फॉर इट? पहले केस के अंदर व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट द मूवमेंट, द प्राइस लेवल इज द reason. For example, if price level falls, what's gonna happen? If the price level falls from P0 to P1, what's gonna happen? I hope this is what they're looking for in this. They're looking for the three effects it's going to start causing. One, the income effect. Price fall means that people's purchasing power is going to increase. And so consumers and businesses and government would increase their spending. Hence, price level के कम होने से CIGX minus M में increase आएगा, M में decrease आएगा because people will buy less. But एक second though. Second is the substitution effect that's going to take place. What is substitution effect? Well, when the price level goes down, foreigners find Pakistani goods to be competitive, and so they want to buy more. And Pakistanis don't want to buy foreign goods, so they want to buy less of that. ठीक हो गया. And the third reason could be the interest rate effect. ये MCQ में आ चुका है. I've done that MCQ yesterday with you in class number 3. If price level falls, interest rate falls. When interest rate falls, there's going to be more borrowing and more spending, and that's going to cause more consumption and investment. But remember, all three of this is going to happen when price levels fall. I'm not talking about one or two goods की उसमें drop आ रहा है. I'm saying price levels generally are falling down. Okay? Shift is a whole new thing. Shift के अंदर price level is not changing, but the curve is moving to the right or to the left. If it shifts to the right, that means there is an increase in aggregate demand. And if it shifts to the left, that means there is a decrease. And it's a non-price factor that we're talking about, non-price factors that we're talking about here. So what could be the reason? Well, I can only think of two good reasons जो मैंने पीछे भी बताया. Number one, taxation. If taxation falls down, same idea. What's going to happen? Well, disposable income. What's going to happen? Disposable income rises. And when disposable income rises, more consumption, more investment, a higher aggregate demand. The AD curve shifts to the right. Second could be interest rate cut drop. If interest rate falls, cost of borrowing is going to go down, more borrowing is going to occur, and more borrowing is going to cause aggregate demand to rise. and that's going to cause a shift. I think this is what is required in this question. It's a good question. I've been longing कि कोई किसी तरह से ये प्राइस चेंज की वजह से सब्स्टिट्यूशन इनकम और इंटरेस्ट रेट इफेक्ट को कभी कोई क्वेश्चन में बनाए. दिस इज अ गुड क्वेश्चन टू गिव एक्चुअली, बट इस तरह के आया नहीं है अभी तक तो एटलीस्ट. This is one of the things which I would say has never been tested in the essay. MCQ में तो टेस्ट होता रहता है. Last question we'll deal with today is discuss whether an increase in AD will always lead to a rise in output and employment. Honestly, I don't even need to go into this question. I think this is a simple question which you've done earlier also. This is that LRAS wala curve. Discuss whether an increase in AD will always lead to. So इसमें आप obviously long run वाली situation के अंदर बात करोगे. इसको तुम break down कर सकते हो question into short run versus long run, right? In the short run, I think you got to do that in part B over here in this one. 1 के B के अंदर, in fact, the answer, let me just bring it from up here only. You know, it's pretty much this question. Sit down. This is what we're talking about. Specifically, this is what we're talking about in this question. The only thing you wanna बल्कि पहले parts के अंदर तो AD का movement और shifts की बात हो गई है, तो I don't even need to say कि which factor is gonna cause AD to shift to the right, but all we're doing is how in the short run, when AD shifts to the right, what it will do is it's gonna increase the output level, output and employment. So this is what's going on. If AD shifts to the right, yes, output will increase because real output is rising. But if you notice aggregate supply के ऊपर, you see a movement along the curve to the right, which is showing movement along the curve. Just give me 1 second. Yeah, sorry about that. So far, none of the questions that were dealing with aggregate supply. I should take a look at one of the questions on aggregate supply also. All right, sorry about that. Let's continue. So yeah, so in this one, in the short run, employment is rising because more output would mean that more resources are going to be used. You want to talk about that a little. However, then you talk about in terms of the long run, कि किस तरह से if AD increases, yes, employment will rise without creating any kind of inflation, and output will also rise unless the economy is at potential, because if you're at potential, you're already at full employment, and any kind of increase in aggregate demand will not increase AD or employment. And the only thing, this is my add-on to this, and the only thing which can cause an output to increase when you're on potential is if your LRAS curve shifts to the right. So this is one of those things that I would want to add for an evaluative part, that under what circumstances can even full employment be changed, right? तो उस बात को हम यहाँ ला सकते हैं. Otherwise, the question is pretty much the same. इसके अंदर the changes they can do is output की जगह price level लिख दें, right? So फिर तुम y axis को भी देखोगे. I'm sure इस तरह के questions we've already dealt with a few times. ठीक है. Other than that, let me see if I can find something on the aggregate supply shifting, because there's a lot to do with fiscal monetary policies. तो वो थोड़ा सा ज़्यादा on the macro side जा रहा है. We'll have a discussion on that a little more in detail. But right now, I don't see any right now. Okay. Yeah. I think maybe this one. This one discuss what effect government assistance to firms to allow them to use new technology might have on equilibrium national incomes, real output, employment, and price levels. Yeah, बन तो सकता है ये वाला, but I can think of a lot more things because ये fiscal policy में जा रहा है, so I would want to have a much larger discussion of it. ये fiscal policy के अंदर we'll talk about that a little more in detail. But for now, take a look at this, and then there are some questions on final play. Do take a look at final play, please. Don't ignore that. At least for the content material, that's a good enough space for you to work with while watching videos. Um, from next class, probably Thursday, we're going to deal with I think economic growth, unemployment, and inflation. That's what we want to start off with in the next class. Again, those are some add-ons to the CIE curriculum this year. So it's not going to be an easy thing to do. Okay. So I'm going to stop here for the day. And I'll see you guys soon.